I was born into what you might call unusual circumstances. My parents, Sarah and Michael Thompson, were well into their 40s when I came into this world, a miracle they never expected. They already had my brother James, who they'd adopted when he was 3 years old, about 6 years before I was born. Mom used to tell me the story of how they found James at the local orphanage. After years of failed attempts to conceive, they had decided to open their hearts to a child who needed a home. The moment they saw James, with his mop of brown curls and shy smile, they knew he was meant to be their son. They gave him everything they could: love, attention, the best education they could afford. He was their whole world. Then I happened. The doctors couldn't believe it, Mom would say, her eyes tearing up every time she told the story. They kept running tests, because they thought there must be some mistake. But there you were, growing strong and healthy inside me. I came into the world on a rainy April morning, a healthy 7-pound baby girl they named Chelsea. Dad said he'd never seen Mom cry so much as she did when she first held me. They were overjoyed to have a daughter, especially one they'd thought impossible. But James was a different story. I remember one of my earliest memories, probably when I was around 3. I was toddling after James in our backyard, my chubby legs struggling to keep up with his longer strides. "Jamie, wait for me," I called out, using the nickname he hated. He whirled around, his face twisted with anger. "Stop following me. And don't call me Jamie." "But I want to play with you," I said, my lower lip trembling. "Well, I don't want to play with you. Why don't you go bother Mom and Dad? They love having their precious little miracle around." I didn't understand then why he was so angry. In my innocent mind, he was my big brother, and I loved him unconditionally. I thought that's just how it worked: you love your family, and they love you back. Mom and Dad tried their best to manage the situation. They made sure to give James just as much attention as they gave me, if not more. When they bought me new clothes, they bought him something too. When they took me to the park, they made sure to schedule something special for James as well. "James, honey," I once overheard Mom saying through his bedroom door, "Chelsea's your sister. She loves you so much. Can't you try to?" "She's not my sister," James had shouted back. "She's just the kid you had when you decided I wasn't enough." When I was 4, things at home went from bad to worse. I remember sitting at the bottom of our stairs one evening, clutching my stuffed rabbit, while another one of James's explosions shook our house. "I'm not going to some shrink," James's voice boomed through the hallway. "You think I'm crazy now? Is that it?" "Nobody thinks you're crazy, sweetheart," Mom's voice was gentle, but strained. "We just want to help you work through your feelings. Dr. Anderson is really nice, she—" "Oh sure," James cut her off. "Ship the adopted kid off to therapy while your real daughter gets to stay home. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" I heard Dad's heavy sigh. "Son, this has nothing to do with Chelsea. We're worried about you. You've been so angry lately." "Of course I'm angry." Something crashed against the wall, probably one of the framed photos Mom loved so much. "You got your perfect little biological child now, so why do you even need me around? Why don't you just send me back?" "James, please," Mom was crying now. "We love you just as much as we love Chelsea. You're our son." "Liar. I'm not your son, I'm just some kid you picked up when you couldn't have your own." I heard footsteps thundering up the stairs and pressed myself against the wall. James stormed past me like I wasn't even there, his face red with rage. His bedroom door slammed so hard the whole house seemed to shake. That became our new normal. Every little thing set James off. When Mom bought me new shoes for kindergarten, she made sure to get him an expensive new backpack for middle school. But he threw it across the room, claiming she'd spent more on my shoes. Even when they tried to include me in his life, it backfired. They took me to his basketball games, thinking it would help us bond as siblings. Instead, he'd get furious if I cheered for him. "Stop bringing her," he yelled after one game. "She's ruining everything. Everyone's looking at her instead of watching me play." I remember one particularly bad day when Mom got us both ice cream cones. Mine had sprinkles on it, and James's didn't, not because Mom hadn't offered, but because he'd said he didn't want any. 5 minutes later, he was having a meltdown about how they always gave me extra special treatment. These episodes would end the same way. James would lock himself in his room, sometimes for days. Mom would leave trays of food outside his door, which he'd only retrieve late at night when he thought we were all asleep. I'd hear him sometimes, padding down the hallway like a ghost. During these silent periods, our house felt like it was holding its breath. Mom would cry when she thought I couldn't see her. Dad would stand outside James's door for long minutes, his hand raised to knock, before walking away without making a sound. And I, not fully understanding what was happening but knowing somehow that I was part of the problem, tried to make myself as small and quiet as possible. I was 6 years old when Aunt Martha died. I didn't know her well. She was Mom's aunt who lived several hours away, but her death threw our family into chaos in a way none of us expected. "We have to leave right now," Mom said, hurriedly packing an overnight bag. "James, you're old enough to watch Chelsea for one day. We'll be back late tonight." James rolled his eyes, but nodded. "Whatever." "There's food in the fridge," Dad added, checking his wallet. "And both our cell numbers are on the kitchen board. Call if anything happens." I know, James muttered. "I'm 15, not stupid." I watched from the window as their car pulled away. James waited exactly 3 minutes after they left, before grabbing his jacket. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice small. "Out. Don't touch my stuff." He was already heading for the door. But Mom and Dad said. "Mom and Dad say a lot of things," he sneered. "Just watch TV or whatever. And don't tell them I left or you'll be sorry." The door slammed behind him, and suddenly I was alone in our big house. At first, I tried to be brave. I watched cartoons, ate the sandwich Mom had left in the fridge, and played with my dolls. But as the hours ticked by and the sun started to set, fear crept in. The shadows grew longer. Every creak of the house made me jump. I tried calling James's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By the time darkness fell completely, I was terrified. I huddled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, crying quietly and watching the front door. It was almost midnight when I heard our parents' car in the driveway. I ran to the door, tears streaming down my face. "Chelsea," Mom scooped me up. "What's wrong? Where's James?" He left," I sobbed. "Right after you did." I was so scared. Dad's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. "He left you alone? All day?" James didn't come home until the next morning, swaggering in like nothing had happened. He found Mom and Dad waiting in the kitchen, their faces grim. "Where were you?" Dad's voice was deadly quiet. James shrugged. "With friends." "We trusted you," Mom's voice cracked. "Your sister could have been hurt." "Oh, here we go again." James threw up his hands. "Everything's about precious Chelsea. She's fine, isn't she? Stop treating me like a criminal." The punishment came swift, grounded for a month, no phone, no friends. But James had one more card to play. 2 days later, a woman from Child Protective Services showed up at our door. James had filed a complaint, claiming our parents were abusive and favored me over him. I remember sitting in my room, listening to the woman interviewing Mom and Dad in the living room. The investigation didn't find any evidence of mistreatment, how could it? But the damage was done. Mom cried for days, and Dad walked around like a ghost, the betrayal written deep in the lines of his face. Everything changed the summer James turned 16. I remember the exact moment. He burst into the kitchen during dinner, his phone clutched in his trembling hand. "They found me," he announced, his voice cracking. "My real parents." Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Dad reached for her hand under the table. "They sent me a message," James continued, practically vibrating with excitement. "They said they made a mistake giving me up. They want to meet me. Are you sure that's what you want? Dad asked carefully. Of course it is. They're my actual parents. I watched Mom flinch at the word actual, but she forced a smile. If that's what you want, we'll support you. The first meeting was arranged at a local restaurant. James came home practically floating. They're loaded, he announced. Like, seriously rich. They own 3 companies. That was just the beginning. Suddenly, James was sporting the latest iPhone. A week later, a brand new gaming console appeared in his room. Then came the car, a shiny red Mercedes that he parked ostentatiously in our driveway. Must be nice having parents who can afford decent gifts, he sneered at Mom one morning when she commented on his new designer shoes. James, Dad warned, but James cut him off. What? It's true. Look at this place, he gestured around our comfortable but modest home. It's practically a slum compared to their house. Did you know they have a pool? And a home theater? The comments got crueler, more deliberate. He started calling our parents the old folks or the poverty patrol. Every conversation became an opportunity to compare our life unfavorably to his biological parents' wealth. God, can't you even afford real orange juice? He'd complain at breakfast. My real mom gets everything organic. Then came that final night. James didn't come home for dinner. Mom kept calling his phone while Dad paced the living room. They were still up at 3 a.m. when he finally strolled in. Where have you been? Mom jumped up. We were worried sick. James's face twisted into a smirk. At my parents' house. My real parents. We are your real, Dad started. No, you're not, James cut him off coldly. And I'm done pretending. I'm moving in with them. Mom stumbled back like she'd been slapped. What? You heard me. They can give me a real life, not this pathetic excuse for one. I'm sick of living in this dump. Sick of pretending to care about your precious little miracle child. He glanced at me with disgust. I don't need hand-me-down parents or a fake sister anymore. The next few weeks were a blur of court appearances and social workers. James's biological parents had money and good lawyers. They argued that James was old enough to choose where he wanted to live. The judge agreed. On moving day, James packed his things efficiently, like he couldn't wait to leave. Mom tried to hug him goodbye. He stepped around her like she was furniture. Dad stood in the doorway, looking old and defeated. James, he said softly. You'll always have a home here. But James was already walking to his Mercedes, not looking back. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even close the front door behind him. Life went on after James left, but there was always something missing in our house, like a phantom limb that still ached even though it wasn't there anymore. Mom would set 4 places at the table sometimes, then quietly remove the extra plate when she caught herself. Dad would pause while telling stories, carefully editing out the parts that involved James. Every holiday, without fail, they'd try to reach out. I'd watch Mom carefully selecting Christmas cards, spending hours writing personal messages inside. Maybe this year, she'd whisper, sealing each envelope with trembling fingers. The cards would disappear into the void of silence James had created around himself. Birthday cards met the same fate. So did the graduation card they sent to his last known address, and the letter Mom wrote when Dad had his minor heart surgery. One night, during my junior year of high school, I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard Mom crying in their bedroom. He's blocked us, Michael, she sobbed. I tried calling from Mary's phone, but that number's disconnected too. I can't even see his Facebook page anymore. I just want to know if he's okay. Just to know he's alive and... My friend's older sister let me use her Facebook account the next day. James's profile wasn't hard to find, he'd become quite the social media star in his wealthy new life. His latest post made my stomach turn. Finally cleaned out the last of my old contacts. No more deadweight from the past. Don't need any reminders of those poor old folks who kept me around until they had their own kid. Time to live my real life with my real family. Best decision ever, living my best life. The photos showed him on tropical vacations, posing next to expensive cars, partying in exclusive clubs. In every shot, he was smiling wider than he ever had in our family photos. I never told Mom and Dad about the post. They were carrying enough pain already. The years slipped by. I graduated high school with honors. Mom and Dad made up for James's absence by cheering loud enough for 3 people. I got accepted to college, packed up my room, and prepared to start my own life. Dad had recovered well from his heart surgery, though he'd finally retired from the accounting firm. They were settling into a quieter life, volunteering at the local library, taking evening walks, doting on the neighbors' grandkids. Sometimes I wondered about James. Not often, I'd trained myself not to. But occasionally, I'd catch myself wondering if he ever regretted his choice, if he ever missed the people who'd loved him before he had access to credit cards and luxury cars. 10 years had passed since he'd walked out our front door. I understood more than I had as a child, about adoption, about trauma, about the complicated tangles of family and belonging. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. Understanding didn't erase the way Mom still glanced at the phone sometimes, hoping it would ring. Understanding didn't fill the silence in our family albums where James's teenage years should have been. That terrible call came during my economics lecture. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Is this Chelsea Thompson? Yes. This is Officer Martinez from the County Police Department. I'm very sorry to inform you. The rest became a blur of words I didn't want to hear. Car accident. Instant. No pain. Need you to identify. I don't remember leaving the lecture hall. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I just remember standing in that cold, fluorescent lit room, looking at the 2 sheets, and thinking, they can't be under there. They're supposed to pick me up for dinner this weekend. The next few days passed in a fog of paperwork and phone calls. I took a leave from college. There were so many decisions to make, so many details to handle. The funeral home wanted to know about flowers. The cemetery needed plots chosen. People kept bringing casseroles I couldn't eat. The day of the funeral dawned bright and clear, the kind of autumn morning Mom loved best. The church filled with familiar faces, neighbors, Dad's colleagues, Mom's library friends. I sat alone in the front pew, staring at the 2 caskets covered in white lilies. Then I heard the murmurs. I turned and saw him striding down the aisle, James. For a moment, my heart lifted. He'd come. After all these years, he'd come to say goodbye. But he wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit followed close behind him, carrying a leather briefcase. "Hello, Chelsea," James said, his voice carrying none of the grief appropriate for the occasion. "Sorry about the old folks." I stared at him, unable to process his casual tone. You came." "Well, yeah." He gestured to the man beside him. "This is Mr. Patterson, my lawyer." "Well, technically my parents' lawyer, my real parents, I mean. They thought I should have proper representation for the inheritance discussion." The word hit me like a physical blow. Inheritance? Obviously, he straightened his designer tie. I may have moved on, but legally, I was their son for 13 years. That entitles me to a share. "They're not even in the ground yet," I whispered, horrified. He shrugged. "Just being efficient. I've got a new business venture that could really use some capital. This inheritance could help with that." The service began. James sat a few pews behind me, and throughout the eulogies, the prayers, the final hymns, I could hear the soft tapping of his phone. When I glanced back once, he was smiling at his screen, completely disconnected from the fact that the people who had raised him, who had loved him unconditionally, were lying in caskets mere feet away. Mom and Dad had taught me that love was patient, love was kind. But watching James tap away on his phone during their funeral, occasionally smirking at whatever message he was sending, I learned that love could also break your heart. The house felt empty when we returned after the funeral. Mr. Collins, the family notary who'd known us for years, sat up at the dining room table, the same table where we'd eaten countless family dinners, where Mom had helped with my homework, where Dad had done the crossword every Sunday morning. James sprawled in Mom's favorite chair, his lawyer Mr. Patterson sitting properly beside him. I chose Dad's old spot, my fingers tracing the worn edge of the table. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Collins adjusted his glasses. His voice was gentle, probably noting my red-rimmed eyes. He pulled out the document, Mom and Dad's last will and testament, dated just 2 months before the accident. As he read, I could almost hear their voices in the formal legal language. "Hereby bequeath our entire estate, including our residential property at 1247 Maple Street and all financial assets, currently valued at approximately $200,000, to our daughter, Chelsea Marie Thompson." "What?" James shot forward in his chair. "That's it? What about me?" Mr. Collins looked up. "The will is quite clear. Miss Thompson is the sole heir." "This is bullshit." James turned to his lawyer. "They can't do this. I was their son." Mr. Patterson reviewed the document carefully, his frown deepening. "The will appears to be properly executed. Given that you legally terminated your relationship with the Thompsons when you chose to return to your biological parents' custody, I'm afraid we don't have grounds to contest." James's face turned purple. Though senile, worthless, he launched into a stream of obscenities about Mom and Dad that made me feel physically ill. Even Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact with his client. "Mr. Thompson," Mr. Collins cleared his throat, interrupting James's tirade. "There is one more thing. Your parents left a letter for Chelsea." He pulled out an envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. I couldn't bear to read it myself, seeing their handwriting would break me all over again. "Would you?" My voice cracked. "Would you read it for me?" Mr. Collins nodded, breaking the seal. "Dearest Chelsea, if you're reading this, we're no longer with you, and for that, we're so sorry. We know you're strong, you've always been our rock, especially after James left. But you're also kind, perhaps the kindest person we've ever known. Everything we have is yours now. The house where we made so many memories, the savings we put aside for your future, it's all in your hands. We trust your judgment completely. But we have one last hope. If James ever finds his way back to us, if he comes to say goodbye and shows that somewhere inside him is still the boy we loved so much, we ask you to consider sharing this inheritance with him. This is entirely your choice, we would never presume to tell you what to do. You'll know in your heart if he deserves this chance. We love you, sweetheart. We love both of you, always have, always will. Mom and Dad." I watched as the color drained from James's face. For the first time since he'd walked into the funeral, his carefully constructed facade cracked. "Chelsea," his voice suddenly turned soft, pleading. "I didn't mean what I said before. About Mom and Dad. I was just upset, you know how it is. The shock of losing them." I stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time not the brother I'd once adored, but the stranger he'd become. "They were such good people," he continued, his voice thick with fake emotion. "And you're right, they did raise me. Maybe we could honor their memory by investing in my new business venture? I'm sure they would have wanted." "Stop," my voice was quiet but firm. "Just stop." He blinked, thrown off script. "Mr. Collins," I turned to the notary, "the letter says this decision is voluntary, correct?" "Absolutely," he nodded. "The choice is entirely yours, Miss Thompson." I stood up, my legs steady, despite the emotional earthquake of the day. "Then my answer is no. You showed exactly who you are today, James. You couldn't even put down your phone during their funeral. You called them worthless before their bodies were cold. But they loved you until their last breath," I continued, my voice breaking slightly. "They still hoped you'd find your way back to being the person they raised you to be. But that person is gone, isn't he? If he ever existed at all." I walked to the front door and opened it. Please leave. Don't come back. Don't try to contact me. James's face darkened. You self-righteous little. Mr. Thompson, his lawyer cut in sharply, gripping his arm. I advise against any further comments. They could be considered harassment, which would have legal consequences. James yanked his arm free, but the threat of legal trouble finally silenced him. He stormed out, his expensive shoes clicking on our worn porch steps one last time. The door slammed so hard that Mom's favorite wind chimes tinkled in protest. That was 3 years ago. I finished college with honors, the degree Mom and Dad had always dreamed of seeing me earn. I kept their house, but rent it out now. Too many memories make it hard to live there yet. The inheritance money is carefully invested, just like Dad would have wanted. Sometimes people ask if I regret my decision. I don't. Mom and Dad's last letter wasn't really about money, it was about choice. They chose to love James, even after he rejected them. They chose to hope, even when hope seemed foolish. And in the end, they chose to trust me to make the right decision. I don't know what happened to James. I don't check his social media anymore. I don't ask about him when I occasionally run into his biological parents at the grocery store. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. But I keep Mom and Dad's letter, tucked away in my desk. Not because I doubt my choice, but because it reminds me of what they taught me about love, that it's patient and kind, yes, but also that real love requires truth. And sometimes, the truest form of love is knowing when to let go.